Good evening. Welcome to the Mothman-podcast. With it going close to Halloween, I'm starting to do some research into witches, especially witches around the North Carolina, Tennessee. Tonight, we're going to be talking to one of the family of the Bell family, which the Bell Witch stories are some really good stories out of Tennessee. And this is the only entity that I've ever run across or heard about which caused the death of an individual. So this is a good story, and I hope you enjoy it. So with that being said, the truth behind the Bell Witch stories, speaking to some of the family members. Y'all have a good evening, and I hope you enjoy this podcast.
Well, of course, John Bell, of course, was the family that originated in Robertson County that had the haunting, so to speak. My name is Robert Henry Bell III, and I'm fifth great-grandson of John Bell, who was killed supposedly by the spirit. John basically moved his family here from North Carolina. He was a very upstanding citizen, friend of Andrew Jackson's. They were farmers. They were tobacco farmers, and they were just trying to raise a family. And around, I believe it was 1816, 1817, they started having these odd things happen. At first, it was happening outside. They would go out hunting, and I think the first account was they saw this large black wolf, and it scared them, and they shot it. And as soon as they shot it, it disappeared, nowhere to be found. And then odd animals. They had a turkey that same thing disappeared on them. And then Betsy, who was the youngest daughter of John Bell, started having things happen to her. She had a little girl appear to her in a swing next to her, and she talked to her, and the little girl never talked back, and she disappeared. And things just started evolving over time. They were happening more frequently, and then all of a sudden, inside the house, of course, back then in the 1800s, everything was by candlelight. There wasn't electricity, and so at night, everything was dark. And so they're asleep in the bed, and they hear what sounds like a rat gnawing on the bedpost, and so they'd light a candle, and as soon as they'd light the candle, it would stop, and there was no rat. And they'd blow the candle back out, and it would start again. And then it started sounding like chains being dragged across the floor, and a rat gnawing on the bedpost. And there again, that it would, when they light the candle, nothing would be there, and so it was disturbing them. They were starting to lose a little bit of sleep, but they tried to keep it all in the family. They didn't want anything getting out in the public, and eventually, it went from the sounds to physically affecting them. Betsy's room was probably the one that saw most of that, but her bed sheets started being pulled off the bed slowly, and she'd grab them and pull them back, and this would happen night after night, and then eventually just yanked the covers off of her, and she yelled at the spirit, and the spirit grabbed her by the hair and drug her across the floor. So it started physically assaulting them. Then all of a sudden, the spirit started getting more power. It started gaining strength, and it started talking. It started whispering at first, and that's the point where John got his best friend, who was a minister. He came to help them figure out what it was. And so he started praying, trying to invoke God to get rid of it. And it started debating the Bible with him. And it started telling John that it was going to kill him.
Hi, Mark.
Be sure to look up Daryl Rourke, author, and you will see the books that I'm writing for children. And I'm also going to be writing some books for older children, which will cover the history of the Mothman and some more stories about the Mothman. So I appreciate you listening to those.
said that he was going to die. And eventually, in December 20th of 1820, John's he was on medication from all the stress and things that he was going through, and his medicine was changed to poison. And when they gave him his medicine, it poisoned him. And then it said its job was done. It said it would come back in 100 years, and it never did. But it sang drinking songs at his funeral. It was very proud of what it had done, and so, but still to this day, John really didn't do anything to deserve it. So nobody knows why or who it was. I'd like to know what the cause. I've done a lot of shows over the years. The A&E show was probably my favorite. I say favorite because I usually don't like doing the shows, but that one I did just because the medium that was in it was a very accurate medium. And her explanation was, she said that she saw a spiritual leader of the tribe that lived there before John lived there, and had a white cloth in his hand with these rocks, and it would bless the rocks, or she would bless the rocks, and put them at the four corners of the property to protect the property, because they knew their land could be taken from them. Well, if you read the story, that in Tennessee was open hunting ground to Indians. They couldn't claim ownership, so it could be taken from them. So that made sense to me. And then it said she said when someone died that she blessed the rocks in the white cloth the same way and put it in the grave with them. So it was doubly protected. And according to her, Drury got into the Indian burial mound looking for artifacts, and instead of getting an artifact, he got a jawbone. And when he brought it in the house, that's when it came in. I will say that, we've had the house I live in, my grandmother's house, has been haunted since I remember. We've had multiple things happen in the house. Probably the most unexplainable thing that happened there. I was just a child. I lived 3 doors up at the time on Garner Street, and my grandmother lived in the house by herself, and she would take a nap every afternoon, and she was awakened by a large crash one day, and she scared her so bad, she called up to the house, told Dad to come down the house quickly. And I remember Dad hanging the phone up and concerned. He grabbed me for some reason. I went with him. I was only 7. And I remember going in the house and seeing how scared Grandmother was. She was still holding the phone. He had a landline, she was holding the phone, and she said, "Search the house." So we searched the house and come back down, and she was still visibly upset. And Dad was like, what happened? She said, "Well, I was taking a nap and I heard a crash, and I came downstairs and this is what I saw." And we're in the kitchen, and I just remember seeing all these plates all over the floor. And at 7, the only thing I noticed is that they were spread evenly across the floor. They weren't touching each other. They weren't laying on top of each other. They were just spread across the floor. And which I thought was kind of, it was cool to me, just because, being a little kid. But I didn't realize that they had come from anywhere. I just saw them on the floor. But there's a butler's pantry in between the kitchen and the dining room that is built into the wall. It's got latching doors on it. All of them were open. And that's where all her china was. And all of that china came out of that cabinet, crashed in the kitchen floor, not in the butler's pantry. It was all in the kitchen. Nothing was in the butler's pantry. And not one piece broke. And so I don't know how, from 9 feet up, a china plate crashes on the floor and wakes my grandmother up and doesn't break. So that's the most unexplainable thing that happened in the house. And so we've had just numerous, just strange things happen. I was telling a group the other day, back in the 70s, we were about this time of year, we were waiting for a show to come on, Channel 4. They were doing the 3 famous ghost stories of Tennessee. And they had the Headless Horseman of Chapel Hill, and I can't remember what the second one was. The third one was obviously the Bell Witch. So back then you didn't have VCRs and all. You had to actually watch the show. So we had planned to watch it for a month, and the whole family was there, and we're in the house, and the console TV, and we watched the first 2 come on, and then the Bell Witch comes on, and we saw Andrew Jackson and the Englishman on the wagon, and then our picture goes out. We have the volume, but we have no picture, and we're like, "Oh, great!" Said we've waited all this time. Dad was upset about it. He went to a commercial break, And we're back on. We get a picture. So after commercial break, no picture. So Dad calls next door to Joe Henry Moore's house and asks him to turn his TV on. And he did. And he asked him if he got a picture. He said, well, yeah, I do. He said, well, you mind if I come over? I've been waiting a long time to see it. I'd like to watch it. He said, no, come on over. So Dad went over there. We were still at the house. And he comes back. He said his picture went out. So I don't know what we weren't supposed to see, but after it was over, our picture came back. Of course, it's an antenna. So, it's not like you lost cable, or I don't know what happened there either. It was just really one of those odd things. And so I was just getting out of college, and Dad wanted me to watch the house when he went on vacation. And since he had a full refrigerator and a nice big house, I said, sure, I don't mind doing that. So I'm sitting in the great room downstairs. It's in the evening, and watching TV all along, and all of a sudden I hear what sounds like a door shut, someone walking around upstairs. But the TV was on. It's one of those things like you hear a noise with another noise going. It was enough to get me up out of the chair, and I remember wanting to get something. I opened the closet door, got a golf club out of the golf bag, and I went upstairs and I looked around, and I didn't see anything, and I said, what's my imagination? So I went back down, put the club up, and finished watching TV about a half hour, and I was staying in one of the bedrooms at the top of the stairs, and there's a long hall up there that attaches to the old part of the house. There's some double doors at the end of the hall. And I'm just about to get in bed at that point. Of course, everything's quiet, and I hear the double doors slam shut, and there wasn't any doubt what I heard that time. I knew exactly what it was, and then I heard the footsteps. Came down the hall. It's a long hall, too. Came down the hall and stopped at my door, and that's about as scared as I've ever been. Because someone was in the house at that point. My hair on my neck stood up. I just remember being shaking. I was shaking. I was scared. And so I go to the closet. I found a baseball bat, and I felt a little braver then. And I went through the shared bathroom into the other bedroom. I knew I had to jump out in the hall. I didn't want to, but I had to if I was going to get any sleep. So I opened the door, jumped out there, and nobody there. So I was really scared then. Didn't know where they were. So I immediately went downstairs to the gun cabinet. I got a 45. I loaded it, and I cocked it, and I went room to room, SWAT team style. Somebody was getting shot that night. I always wondered if I could shoot somebody. No, it wasn't any doubt. Somebody was going to get shot that night. And it took me about a half hour to go through the whole house and nothing. And so I slept with the door locked, light on, pistol by the bed. And I didn't tell anybody about it. And I actually forgot about the story because we had so many things over the years happen. And we had a guy from New York we hired to come down in Balmer. And he knew nothing of the story of the Bell Witch either. And Dad was leaving town, same thing, wanted him to watch the house. So it's back when Buffalo was in the Stanley Cup playoffs because he was watching the playoffs. And he calls me up. He said, Bob, he goes, I just want you to know I'm not staying in the house tonight. I'm like, why? He said, well, there's somebody there. I'm like, what do you mean? And he proceeds to tell me this story. He's sitting in the chair I was sitting in earlier. He's watching the hockey playoffs, and he hears the noise upstairs. He opens the closet door, gets a golf club out of the golf bag. And then when he said that, it all started coming back to me about what had happened to me. And I'm listening to him, and I'm shaking my head. I don't know. He said, yeah, he went upstairs, looked around, nothing. He came back down, watched TV. He said about another half hour or so. He said he heard a door slam shut. He said he turned the TV off and he left. He wasn't going back. He wanted to just let me know there was somebody in the house. And I told him what happened to me. There's a long pause. He goes, and you let me go in there. I said, I'm sorry. I'd forgotten. I forgot that happened. So, it's all these things happen, and there's so many things happen, you forget about them. You almost have to be reminded of them. But, when my dad, let me back up, because my dad decided he wanted to move to Nashville. And so he was getting the house ready to sell, and I wound up buying it at auction. I was not planning on buying it at the time, so we had to physically clean the house out. Dad moved in after grandmother died. We didn't have to totally clean the house out. So when we went through the old part of the house, there's some cabinets about 9.5 feet up, and they're very, very deep. They're probably 4 feet deep. And so in the back of that cabinet was a stack of the old family Bibles. We didn't know they were there. And we started going through them, C.C. Bell and, all our family tree. Last Bible, beautiful old Bible. We opened it up, Joel Egbert Bell. I'm like, oh. That's our connection to the story. I'm like, okay. I said, that's interesting. Then I look at the date on it. The date is 1820. I'm like, oh, it was in the house. John was killed December 1820. I was like, oh. I was like, then immediately I'm like, that's why we're having all this weird stuff happen. The house has no connection to the story other than us. Right. And so my sister, I have twin sisters, one of them said, she goes, oh, that is a beautiful Bible. I'd love to have that. And I'm like, yeah, you need to have that Bible. She didn't make the connection. I did. And of course, it's a beautiful old 1820 Bible. I mean, it was really pretty. And so she took it. And we all witnessed her taking it. And she got CC's Bible and a couple other things. And then, of course, the show comes out, and I'm telling them about it. And they want to use the Bible for the show. And I said, well, I'm sure she'll let you use it. So I call her up and tell her, Annie is wanting to use the Bible. And long pause. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, well, I said, Karen, when we found the old family Bibles, the last one was Joel's Bible, that 1820 Bible that you took, that you made a big deal about. They want to use that Bible. She's like, I don't remember seeing that Bible. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I said, it was the big old pretty Bible. It's the one that you made a big deal about. And she goes, I'm sorry. She goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't recall that at all. I was like, she goes, I don't have it.
So it's just gone?
Well, I know it's not in my house because nothing's happened since I lived there.
So you haven't seen it?
I moved in 2000. Not one thing's happened in the house. And that's been since the Bible's been gone. And Karen hadn't had anything happen in her house either. And I never really asked her about it, about the Bible or about things happening. I just assumed, since it was out of the county that was the reason she didn't have anything happening. But she didn't have it. It's gone. It disappeared. It's just gone. And that's the last thing. Everything else from the story's disappeared. There's a letter posted down at the cave, Bellwitch Cave. There again, there's nothing factual that until this last thing came out about Betsy having voices. But the letter down there, it's a copy of the letter. But the letter was two boys writing home to their mother. And they were going to the Bell House to see the angel. And said they made it to Adams, and they were on the other side of the river. They weren't able to cross that day. And said that they were able to cross the next day, and they made it to the house. And said the first night nothing happened. And said the second night it happened. And said it's not an angel, it's the devil. So I don't know what was going on in that house, but there was something going on. There's just too many things that have been passed down that just totally exclude the story from happening. It had to happen. I just don't know to what level it happened. I always wonder how much the story changed, but that one was dated 1819. That was right when it was really going strong, and if it affected them like that, then it was pretty prevalent. So I don't think it was a witch. It may be a spirit. I don't know. Nobody knows what it really was. But I know there's things I don't understand. There's things that happen I can't explain. Much like the dishes falling, you can't explain that, but it happened. I don't understand it, but I know it happened. And it's kind of that way with this. I don't know exactly what it was, but I know that there was something there.
I hope you liked tonight's episode. It was really interesting. I think we run across the devil on that one. So, with that being said, this is the Mothman, wishing you a good evening, and thank you for listening. Good night.